From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. How high can they go?
All signs still pointing that we are uptrending in this market here.
Cattle prices smash records again this week. As Trump takes office, immigration and mass deportation is in focus, and one California grower says there's a sense of nervousness similar to what it was like during the Obama administration.
That's where our employees live, and they come to not just my farm, but all the farms out here. And we would not be able to farm out here without these people.
It's been 40 years since the U.S. passed immigration reform.
I think there are so many people that are really struggling with having to use the H-2A program.
And growers argue that the system is broken and H-2A is becoming too expensive to use. And a final ride for a man who lived to serve.
He deserved every bit of that tribute. He didn't ever ask for it. I hope he's smiling down on us.
A John Deere technician for 30 years, how area farmers put together a fitting tractor tribute to say goodbye. And as we go to air, at last report on Friday, aides to President Trump were looking for ways to avoid sweeping 25% tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico. Speaking from the Oval Office on Thursday, Mr. Trump announced his administration was moving forward with a plan to start imposing those tariffs on Saturday. He cited concerns over trade deficits, illegal immigration, and the fentanyl crisis. He also reiterated plans to impose tariffs on China over its alleged role in fentanyl trafficking. The move triggered warnings of an economic fallout, and both Canada and Mexico vowed retaliatory measures. This story is continuing to develop, so make sure to check out the latest on agweb.com. More of President Trump's key cabinet nominees faced hearings this week. The Senate Finance Committee grilled Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who was nominated to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Kennedy's nomination has generated significant attention and controversy, primarily due to his past statements and positions on vaccine, abortion, and his potential impact on the food sector. Farm Journal's January Ag Economist's Monthly Monitor recently asking if Kennedy would be a positive for U.S. agriculture in the position as health secretary. 90% of those surveyed said no. However, some say Kennedy's push to make America healthy again could come with some benefits for segments of U.S. ag, including a push for food providers to use more animal fats versus seed oils. During his confirmation hearing, Kennedy tried to ease farmers' concerns about his stances against GMOs, additives, and pesticides.
American farms are the bedrock of our culture, of our politics, of our national security. I was a 4-H kid, and I spent my summer working on ranches. I went to work with our farmers. I want to work with our farmers and food producers to remove burdensome regulations and unleash American ingenuity.
Kennedy detailed his goals of trying to make America healthy again, saying it can be done through nutrition-based prevention, which could potentially shake up U.S. food production. And the Republican-controlled Senate confirmed Lee Zeldin to lead the Environmental Protection Agency. The vote there was 56-42 in Zeldin's favor. Zeldin, a former Republican congressman from New York, is a longtime ally of the president, but his past stance on ethanol has some in agriculture concerned. Well, just ahead of USDA's cattle inventory report released on Friday, for several days straight this week, cattle futures hit record highs. Market watchers say live cattle futures are trading at a discount to the Fed cash market, so that helped pull up the board, and it's hard to know where it projects prices to go to next, as we're in uncharted territory.
We've got a very positive basis, the cash leading the market here. We've got bull spreads working, the market's higher. So with that basis and everything, we've got all signs still pointing that we are uptrending in this market here.
And the latest cattle on feed report is adding some fuel, with marketings at 101%, while the on feed number was at 99% and placements at 96.7%. Both were below trade guesses. Well, as we first talked about in our markets segment last weekend on the show, there's concern right now about losses to the winter wheat crop following last week's extreme cold snap. The Arctic blast hitting several key growing areas that have limited snow cover to blanket the crop right now. Take a look at this snow depth map from NOAA, and you can see those areas where there's little to no snow, including top winter wheat producer Kansas, and then sub-freezing temperatures stretching from the northern to the southern U.S. last week caused some winter kill damage to both classes of winter wheat, especially areas that were lacking that snow cover. The damage is just being assessed as temperatures warm up and allow the crop to thaw out, but the full extent may not be known until later in the season.
At the height of the recent cold wave, 19th through the 21st of January, sub-zero temperatures were noted across the Great Plains as far south as the northern panhandle of Texas, and we saw widespread minus 20-degree readings or below across the northern plains.
Rippey says at the end of December, anywhere from a quarter to one-third of the winter wheat was rated poor to very poor, with Nebraska and South Dakota in the epic center of that northern plains drought. Well, drought is a concern in parts of the U.S. We'll have a check of the drought monitor with Jack Van Meter next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Pioneer. With industry-leading genetics, Pioneer brand corn is bred to withstand your toughest challenges and deliver winning yield potential. Pioneer corn, your best year starts here.
Severe weather hit the South late this week, but a warmer weather pattern also blanketed the U.S. That's as we are keeping a close eye on drought concerns and the drought situation across the country. Jack Van Meter has your forecast this weekend.
Our temperature outlook to start off February, as we can see the South really going to be warm. Take a look at the Four Corners states first. As we can see, southern New Mexico over by El Paso, really warm, especially to start off the month. And that ridge of the warmth is really going to go through the Gulf states and down to Florida, actually up towards the East Coast as well. Parts of Indiana getting in on that action too. And as we can see just north of that, we can see again, there's that line of the average temperatures, and this is all going to mirror pretty much the jet stream. We are starting to see that jet stream start to normal out and flatline out, which is good news. That means a more quiet weather pattern is starting to set in. That being said, for the precipitation outlook, it looks like it's going to be fairly rainy and snowy for that fact for a lot of folks, especially in the Midwest, Ohio River Valley region, going all the way up towards the East Coast there, Pacific Northwest, and especially, again, out west too, because there's going to be a lot of moisture, especially coming off of the ocean. Take a look at this. This is our snowfall estimate and what's on the ground right now. And you saw right as we were about to zoom in that Florida and all the Gulf states have completely lost their snowpack just because, again, really warm temperatures set in, especially last week. A couple folks down there hit 80 degrees again, and that obviously ate up a lot of the snow there, but their snowpack still holding really decent, especially for our Rocky Mountain states going up, especially upstate in Colorado. That being said, actually not bad at all if we go out east as well, really starting to hold on to a lot of snowfall as well. For our drought monitor, we are seeing conditions improve and worsen at the same time. As we start out east, we can see, again, some of our problem areas have been the Carolinas for that matter. North Carolina going to just be dealing with that moderate drought, and it's actually going to worsen a little bit as we start to head up coast as well. Parts of Pennsylvania and New Jersey really dealing with parts of severe drought and actually extreme in some cases. That being said, heading out west, again, the drought situation down in Southern California is still going to be a major issue with extreme levels of drought still in place. That being said, they did just get a shot of rain earlier, about a couple weeks ago or so, but unfortunately, instead of helping that case down there, it did trigger a few mudslides because, of course, as we all know, those wildfires came in and really hurt a lot of the vegetation and the root structure down there.
Thanks, Jack. Well, corn futures hitting an 8-month high this week, and there are drought concerns in Argentina. We'll look into the impact on the markets with Naomi Bloom and Brian Splitt next. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Brian Splitt and Naomi Bloom joining us to talk markets. Naomi, corn hitting 8-month highs this week. You know, we've been talking about what's driving it, but are the same fundamentals still at play?
Well, definitely, we still have the corn markets well supported from that surprise friendly USDA report. Add into it just that the weather conditions in South America not totally perfect, with Argentina getting some rain, but not enough to alleviate those drought conditions, and Brazil staying on the wetter side. So that means the second crop corn planting is a little slower than normal. So that's been supporting the market overall. Weekly export sales, again, just a nice solid number, with weekly ethanol numbers supportive as well. But now that we're up near this $5 price handle, it's the point of wondering what can come. What more friendly news can we have to send prices higher? Or do we finally see some sort of a price correction lower, especially as we head towards that February 1st deadline with trade tariff and news for Mexico, China, and Canada? That's probably going to be a main feature point for the market for next week.
Yeah, Brian, let's get into that, because here we are this weekend. It is February 1st, and we know that Trump had been talking about that February 1st timeline for imposing some of these tariffs. So no matter what we see announced this weekend, of course, we're having a discussion before anything's announced, but no matter what we see announced this weekend, how should growers be preparing for the possible volatility?
Yeah, I think we have to recognize that there's been a different energy in the market as of late. The trading ranges have expanded day to day. The amount of volatility is increasing. We're seeing that in the pricing of the options. And so I think for producers, something to just really consider is in this new environment with carryout estimates for corn, for example, just north of 1.5 billion bushels and several hundred million bushels lower than where the USDA had us just a few months ago. Are we in an environment where your participation may require being a little bit more conservative, taking into account your cash flow at this time of year? Do you want margin calls? Are they okay? Do you want to avoid margin calls? And I have a feeling that with the size of the fund position in corn, if a correction is around the corner, it could be rather sizable. And I think options will give you the coverage that you may want and still allow you to hold bushels into summer at this point. So I think that's where the producer is. We've got all the bushels sold that we want to sell for JFM, January, February, March. We've seen $5 corn, and it's probably just worth having a floor under the market here and seeing if we see anything exciting develop in the next 4 to 5 months.
Yeah, Naomi, what do you think a producer's strategy should be? We know that we've seen a lot of old crop move since that January report, but there's more out there. We're looking at new crop now. What are you telling producers?
Well, just to have a balanced approach with everything. So yes, to making cash sales, because we are at values that we didn't think were possible. And really to go forward from here with higher prices, you need a perfect storm of things to happen with no trade drama. You need bad weather in South America. You need bad weather in the United States this spring and summer. And we need good news on the biofuel mandates fast. Now, if those things can happen, you've got a reason why the corn market can go higher from here. But if they don't, and to Brian's point, if the funds start to exit those long positions and sell lower, you definitely want to have some puts under the market to protect you, just in case we see the market just start to see some profit taking as we go into February. Also, price discovery month for crop insurance. So there's a lot of volatility potentially ahead, either or lower, and you need to be ready for either.
Real quick, Brian, winter wheat, we're talking about potential damage from some of the cold and just those areas that don't have a lot of snow cover that could be vulnerable to that. But when you look at the market technically, what is it telling us?
So right now, yes, you've talked about a couple fundamental stories, and I've even heard thoughts about, the war impacting just the manpower in Russia being able to move grain, from farm to port. But technically, it looks like there's a head and shoulder bottom brewing, and this would be specific to the soft red wheat, the Chicago variety. We know that the funds are still heavily short wheat. The last commitment of trade report had them short roughly 90,000 contracts of Chicago wheat. And so we're interacting right now with what would be the neckline of the pattern. That's roughly the 580 area for the May contract. You get some closes above that. Overall, the measurement would take you up to about 620. The 200-day moving average is around 615. So that was basically where the market stalled out in October for our fall highs, was against that 200-day moving average. So I think, again, if we see some short covering and a little bit more of a narrative building in wheat, wheat's cheap compared to corn. You look at corn wheat spreads and just an unwind of that, where if the funds want to take some profit in corn and reduce their short position in wheat, we could see a little bit of a rebalance here.
Well, these cattle prices, they have been unbelievable lately. Is there any end in sight? We need to take a quick break, and then we'll talk about that. Welcome back. Naomi Bloom as well as Brian Splitt joining us. All right, Naomi, I know that we had USDA's cattle inventory report released late on Friday. We're having this discussion before that happened late in the day. But it seems like the cattle market is showing little signs of slowing down right now.
Right. There just has been so much strength because of higher cash sales. Box beef values have been strong. So that market just continuing to propel higher. The risk, of course, always is that at any time we see profit taking set in, we see the market get a little bit nervous if export sales aren't up to high standards, or if the consumer starts to balk finally at the grocery store because of higher values. Now, the risk would be, because the funds are heavily net long in both the live cattle and the feeder contracts, that if the profit taking starts to kick in, it's going to trigger technical selling. And once the technical selling happens, it is just going to be a free fall of prices just falling lower. So for the cattle producers out there, it's important just to continue to have some sort of a price floor underneath the market, just in case the market finds that point of reason, fundamentally or technically, to just actually start the technical sell-off, because these prices are just phenomenal. And it does make you wonder how high prices could go, especially as we still have uncertainties regarding border openings and keeping an eye on things with both Mexico and Canada in that capacity.
Well, Brian, she just mentioned profit taking. And, we've seen it in the grains. When you have this massive run higher, like we've seen in cattle, the bottom can drop out just as quick. Is that a concern at all for you when you look at this market right now?
Anytime you have a record fund position, whether it's the long or the short side in any market, it does make that market vulnerable. And so again, as Naomi had mentioned, the record length in both the live cattle and the feeder cattle makes this market vulnerable to not only large corrections, but if there's a general change in the narrative, they may want out of their positions. Again, as we get into the weekend, we're seeing some weakness. I think we're going to know, and we've seen some pretty gnarly moves to the downside in cattle before. I think the one that would stick out in recent history would be from September to December of 2023. And we were off the highs several dollars, and then the real selling came in. We started to see gaps lower. And I think that will really be our cue, is if this market starts to gap lower coming out of a weekend, and then you see additional gaps, you're probably in store for some really volatile trade and a heavy correction in front of you. Now, thinking back to the week when we saw record values, 200 was a price that was like kind of that major benchmark. And then we got high enough where you could have put in a 200 floor net on April live cattle with an option of 204 strike price. It was trading under $4. It gives you a 200 worst case scenario. So I think that's the type of play that producers have to be looking at. Again, selling calls above the market has been a difficult thing to do. It's created major margin calls. And I think we're at levels where just a simple put is sufficient to give you the coverage that you need.
We're going to take a deep dive into cattle prices next week. We're headed to Cattle Convention. We'll have a live taping of U.S. Farm Report on noon on Wednesday. So if you'll be in San Antonio for that, we hope you join us for our live taping. Naomi, Brian, thank you so much for dissecting all of the complex issues right now we're kind of wading through in this market. We appreciate it. We need to take a quick break, and the Machinery Pete will join us next.
Be part of the live audience in San Antonio at the 2025 NCBA Cattle Convention. Don't miss U.S. Farm Report host Tyne Morgan's live taping with industry experts February 5th at noon.
Well, folks, I love going to Illinois, and on this segment of Tractor Tales, that's where we're headed to check out a classic John Deere A.
It was the first of the 2 cylinders that my dad bought. It was a local tractor from a neighbor that had one that was not needing it anymore, I guess. It wasn't too bad, but it wasn't painted like a John Deere A. It was painted like a 720, so it had the yellow stripes on it, and so it didn't look right. But as kids, we didn't care. It was a tractor to ride around on. I assume the guy that had it before that wanted to make it look like he had a newer, bigger tractor than he actually did. Like most of the rest of the antiques, it's parade tractors, antique show tractors, kind of getting out of duty. So Oh, there's times where we will pull some of the 2-cylinders out if we're moving hay racks and wagons and stuff around, because it's just so much easier and faster to move stuff with these than some of the bigger, newer tractors. Going through it, we pretty much stripped it down and repainted it. It wasn't a bad project, but it was one of my earlier paint jobs that I did. We acquired some set of fenders for it, built brackets, and got them added to it also. Because growing up, we never had that option.
Thanks, Greg. Well, immigration and mass deportation is in focus, and there are concerns of the impact that could have on agriculture. But some growers say the biggest concern when it comes to labor is the cost of H-2A and an immigration system that's broken in the U.S. We explore all of that in our Farm Journal report coming up next.
You're watching U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition. Farm Journal Report on U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by CropLife America. CropLife America knows that the EPA's Endangered Species Act work plan may impact how you manage your fields and pest pressures. Learn more about what is changing and how CropLife is fighting for practical solutions at croplifeamerica.org/ESA.
Immigration and mass deportation is in focus as the Trump administration carries out sweeping policy changes. Immigration's impact on agriculture is immense, and the changes are creating a nervousness that hasn't been felt in agriculture since the Obama administration. But the bigger concern is ag labor, with an immigration system that farmers argue needs fixed, and an H-2A program that many say has become too costly to even use. What's immigration's influence on ag? That's this week's Farm Journal report.
I started my own operation in 1985.
Joe Del Bosque is a first-generation farmer here in Central California.
We grow organic melons, that is cantaloupes, honeydews, and watermelons. We also grow organic processing tomatoes and almonds and cherries.
Situated on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley, a lot has changed in his 40 years of running his own farm. What hasn't is the fact that most of what he produces is all hand-picked.
Melons are highly perishable. When they're ready, they got to be picked.
Del Bosque says if they miss even a couple days of work, they could lose a crop. Between water issues and the switch from conventional to organic, which reduced their acres, Del Bosque now employs half of what he did 8 years ago. And still, one of his biggest challenges is finding enough labor.
We try to focus mostly on local labor. That doesn't mean they're not immigrant labor. They are immigrants. They just live locally.
They also have crews that come from Arizona for just the season. But one thing they're no longer able to do is find seasonal labor from Mexico that work for a few months and then return back home.
During the Obama years, he tightened the border tremendously. And sometimes those people couldn't come anymore.
That's when the struggles with labor shortages started for Del Bosque and other area farmers here.
He deported more people than Trump and Biden put together. He deported about almost 3 million people in his 2 terms. I've heard that it was an average of 1,000 people per day. That was when we felt probably the most of labor shortages, and we lost fruit sometimes during those terms.
As the Trump administration took office, promises of immigration crackdown and mass deportations are back in the focus again. And there's a nervousness on farms and in their communities.
And we would not be able to farm out here without these people.
President Trump's chief of staff, Stephen Miller, appeared on CNN this week defending the president's mass deportation plan, saying the target is not ag.
Only 1% of alien workers in the entire country work in agriculture. The top destination for illegal aliens are large cities like New York, like Los Angeles, and small industrial towns, of course, all across the heartland, as we've seen with the Biden floods. None of those illegal aliens are doing farm work.
According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, immigrant workers comprise nearly 20% of the U.S. workforce, contributing more than $80 billion in taxes annually. And with shortages of labor already, the concern is mass deportation of those immigrants who follow the law could make that shortage worse and drive inflation. Having enough ag labor is a problem farmers are dealing with all across the country. Just ask Mark Arnish, who used to be one of the largest onion growers in the U.S.
There was a morning where I came out into the field and I had 250 workers helping transplant a crop out of Arizona into a field here in Colorado. And the following day I had 9. You just can't control a variable like that.
And that's when he completely walked away from growing onions. Grower after grower will tell you the immigration system in the U.S. is broken.
It's definitely broken.
We're up at 40 years from not having passed comprehensive immigration reform in this country. And it sure doesn't look like it's going to happen in the next year.
Mary Kay Thatcher is senior lead for federal government relations at Syngenta. She says even if the U.S. doesn't pass immigration reform, H-2A is becoming too expensive for many growers.
And I mean, I've been hearing story after story in the hallways here about really good producers, strong competitors having to go out of business because they just can't afford the new effective minimum wage rate and just the other mandates that get put on them, be it transportation cost or housing cost or whatever for H-2A.
Del Bosque says they've never used H-2A, and one reason is because of the cost and all the other requirements involved.
H-2A is very expensive to use. Our state minimum wage here is $16, and the H-2A minimum wage is over $19. Think about that. The guest workers have to be paid more.
If you want your food grown in America, Del Bosque says you have to have the workforce to grow your food and harvest it here. And he says that's why all of agriculture, no matter where you live or what you grow, must be united.
We're a little minority. We farmers don't have any political clout, neither here in California or anywhere else in the United States. We need to stick together.
Well, joining us now is Christina Herrick, produce editor at Farm Journal. Christina, we briefly talked about the rising cost of labor just now in our Farm Journal report, but I know you've uncovered really some staggering statistics.
Yes, so I've been working on a series on labor, and so I talked to the president of the Northwest Horticulture Council that he surveyed a bunch of growers to just try to figure out what was going on. You know, he's kind of said for years he'd heard anecdotally that there were issues, but they finally started tracking it. The graphic you're seeing, we found that in 2013, when the survey started, 37% of growers' gross returns, so their take home after the pay per bin, packing charges, like all of the other associated charges, went to their labor costs. And then in 2022, that number jumped to 70%. And then in 2023, which was a really large crop of apples, that figure jumped to 99%. So pretty staggering cost. And, you know, that's just labor.
Yeah, and seeing that on the screen, it is so telling. You know, are there concerns that this could then cause consolidation in the produce sector?
There is definitely solid concern. I've talked to a couple growers. There's definitely concern that family farms are going to go out of business because of this, just because of the staggering costs.
Again, that was Christina Herrick, produce editor at Farm Journal. Well, the battle over the Panama Canal, what impact is that having on agriculture? Michelle Rupp joins us for Ag Around the World next. Well, a key waterway used for moving goods, including U.S. agriculture, around the world is in President Trump's crosshairs. The president, in his inaugural address, mentioning the Panama Canal, saying China controls that canal, adding the U.S., quote, gave it to Panama and we're taking it back, end quote. Farm Journal's Michelle Rook has been looking into the critical trade route and what a battle over it could mean for U.S. ag.
Tyne, the Panama Canal is a strategic waterway, and any disruption in access to this critical logistics channel would hurt U.S. ag exports. So the industry is closely watching these developments. Now, in response to President Trump's renewed pledge to take over the canal due to Chinese influence, Panamanian authorities have initiated an audit of Panama Ports Company, which is at the heart of the issue. The Panama Canal has been the center of controversy since the U.S. turned the canal over to Panama in 2000 under a treaty signed between the two parties in 1977. But that treaty binds Panama's operations.
Another ingredient of that treaty is that the canal must always be neutral. It can't prefer one country over the other. And if that ever was in danger or in peril, U.S. military intervention would be justified.
President Trump expressed concern about the Chinese influence in Panama, calling it a national security issue. Steenhoek says China has provided some financing for a bridge over the canal, but at issue is their influence in 2 regional ports. 2
of the 5 are actually operated by a Hong Kong-based company called Hutchison Port Holdings. And this company originally received a 25-year concession to operate those 2 ports, one on the Pacific side, one on the Atlantic side, in the late 1990s. And so just recently, that 25-year concession came up and it was then re-extended.
The audit will look at Hutchison Holdings' compliance with that agreement as part of a broader investigation which aims to ensure the efficient and transparent use of public resources. President Trump also claims U.S. ships have been unfairly charged for using the canal. Steenhoek attributes recent higher freight charges to the drought, which limited service, but also points out the tolls are transparent and governed by the treaty signed with the U.S.
Part of the treaty, made sure that it had to be governed on a neutral basis. So one country, one industry didn't receive preferential treatment. The tolls are very public in how they assess those tolls. And it's based on different types of vessel types, different types of tonnage that's utilizing the canal.
Meanwhile, Panama's president has declared Panama's control of the canal as non-negotiable, and so the ag industry can only hope for a resolution that doesn't disrupt trade. I'm Michelle Rook for U.S. Farm Report.
A lot of history there. Thanks, Michelle. Well, egg prices are on the rise, and both sides of the aisle are now blaming it on bad policy. What is the real reason behind the price spike? That's Chip's Corner next. Welcome back. Time now for Chip's Corner. Well, Chip, egg prices making headlines, even bigger headlines this week. A new estimate from USDA says we could see egg prices rise another 20% this year. Government data shows that the average price of a dozen eggs is already $4.15 last month. As we've been reporting, really it ties back to avian flu outbreak and inflation. Right. The agency says avian flu has killed over 17 million egg-laying hens in November and December. But when you look at that, that doesn't seem to matter right now because it has become a political discussion. We have the GOP blaming the Biden administration. We have Democrats now blaming the Trump administration. I mean, this has become a blame game.
Oh, absolutely. It is a political hot potato, and it's because it was a campaign issue. From the Trump administration saying, listen, we're going to do what we can to get grocery prices down, and egg prices are kind of the headline event when it comes to grocery prices and the increases there. The bottom line is it's a supply side situation. As you said, 17 million more layers were euthanized in an effort to control H5N1. I had a conversation with Iowa Ag Secretary Mike Naig. What is the potential that we could bring a vaccine into the picture and try to get ahead of it? Here's what he had to say.
United States has policies that would prevent somebody from importing to us. We shouldn't expect that everybody's just going to accept from us. And so those are challenges, and yet those are things that can be worked on and negotiated into trade agreements. So I always say, don't let that be the only reason that we would say, well, it can't be done. No, right. It can be done, but it's not easily done. I want to put a flag there. In terms of vaccine, look, you're right. It's a little bit like that, the flu shot that you and I might get. And, some years it's more effective than others. The same concept, right? You might be in the right area, you might not be. So the efficacy of a vaccine, it's not a silver bullet by any means.
Yeah, so there's the bottom line, Tyne. I mean, if we would initiate a vaccine program, what's it going to do to the trade relations that we have, and what might it do to the exports of some of the poultry products that we're producing? And then the bottom line is, how good is it? How good is it going to be? What can we expect from a vaccine? And there's a whole lot of unknowns on that front.
Chip Flory, we really appreciate you joining us this weekend. You can catch him twice a day for AgriTalk AM and AgriTalk PM. All right, when we come back, America's very first armory. It's still standing today. We travel the countryside with Andrew McCrae next. America's very first armory is still standing today. We're traveling the countryside this weekend with Andrew McCrae off to the nation's first armory for a glimpse of the world's largest collection of U.S. military small arms.
Springfield, Massachusetts has long been an important place in this country for supplying the weapons needed by the nation's military. As Susan Ashman shares, when the American colonies declared their independence, the role of Springfield Armory began to change.
And then when we were at war with England, we were importing French Charlevilles at that time. So that's what they were using. But, you know, if we were fighting for our independence, why are we still dependent on these foreign firearms? So George Washington wanted his own site to manufacture firearms.
The city of Springfield was a good place to manufacture firearms for the new nation. It is located on the Connecticut River, which provided water power to help with manufacturing. By the 1790s, this site was ready to begin making guns for the U.S. military.
So the first year of manufacturing was 1795, and they basically copied that French Charleville, calling it the Springfield Charleville, and they made approximately 245 of those all by hand.
A walk around this National Historic Site will show you some technology developed to help the country get the upper hand when it came to military might.
This is the Blanchard lathe designed by Thomas Blanchard, and this is from 1822, and this is how you would carve out rifle stocks in an irregular shape.
You'll find many pieces of equipment developed here over the years to help the nation craft its firearms. In 1843, poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow came by the armory while on his honeymoon. The massive racks of muskets were a sight that inspired him to include them in his writings.
His wife, Fanny, thought it looked like a church organ, so she called it the Organ of Muskets. And then Henry Wadsworth Longfellow actually wrote a poem about it. And all it is that's the last two racks, how they used to store the firearms at that time in here. So you would see these on all three floors.
And when you consider the number and size of buildings here, the Springfield Armory was an amazing arsenal for the U.S. military. The Armory produced weapons from the late 1700s until the Vietnam War. Production and the makeup of the workforce here changed as the nation entered new conflicts abroad. During World War II, production of the M1 rifle became critically important, and with so many men overseas in battle, a new workforce composed of 42% women was here.
And the focus was the M1. So the parts for it, so the women were working on trigger assemblies, barrels. You even had a woman working down at the forge. So they were doing any job that the men would do, the women stepped in to do as well.
Although these buildings no longer house people nor the weapons of war, it is a place where people come to hear the story, from muskets to machine guns, and defending freedoms both here and abroad. Traveling the countryside in Springfield, Massachusetts, I'm Andrew McCrae.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, up next, one last ride and a final goodbye for a man who lived and breathed John Deere Green. The tractor tribute is next. Well, this week in rural Missouri, we were able to witness a final ride for a man who lived to serve. A John Deere technician for 30 years, Steve Hamm had a meaningful impact on farmers in his area. And this week, as Hamm was laid to rest, those farmers put together a fitting tractor tribute to say goodbye. A love for tractors.
Steve was a pioneer for that kind of knowledge. We really depended on him.
And an admiration for John Deere Green.
A man of integrity, passion for what he did, a person that served a lot of people.
Steve Hamm was a John Deere mobile technician for 30 years and truly dedicated to his craft.
He lived to serve. He put everyone else above him or before him.
When you look at the communities that Steve served, people from all of them, the surrounding, small towns and everything else would call Steve. If it was 10 o'clock at night, Steve took the call.
Dennis says for area farmers, Steve was a loyal lifeline in the field.
This equipment is so complicated these days. And Steve pursued the passion of always learning. If there was anything he couldn't fix, he found out how to fix. And he wouldn't quit. He had the passion that made him pursue that until he got it. And I think that's what really set him apart.
On Tuesday this week, those same farmers who Steve served for all those years found a way to show just how grateful they were.
I've never seen a tribute for somebody that was more compelling probably than that tribute.
Tractor after tractor, combines with their augers out, all lined the road next to the cemetery where Steve would be laid to rest.
I couldn't help but think as we were doing the graveside service the other day, the efforts made by so many people to be there. And as I looked up on the hill where all of the farmers were there, it was almost as if there was a mist, because you could see the moisture in the eyes of so many of these people that are hardened individuals, people that, you know, that are used to being out in nature, fighting it, whether flood or drought or whatever it is. And through that toughness, they still had those kind of feelings for Steve.
Farmers who never had the chance to say thank you or goodbye stepped up to the call this week with a touching tractor tribute.
He deserved every bit of that tribute. He didn't ever ask for it. I hope he's smiling down on us.
A nod to something Steve loved so much as Steve took his final ride. It really was breathtaking to witness this week. Dennis Estes told me what happened this week isn't just a tribute to the amazing man that Steve Hamm was. It's also a salute to technicians and mechanics across the country who make sure our nation's farmers stay running. Well, that's all the time we have this weekend. We're on the road next week to the annual cattle convention in San Antonio. We'll see you next weekend as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.